Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In this week's episode, we're going to talk very quickly about the latest inflation CPI data in Canada, how it looks really positive, but is it really positive when it comes to the Vancouver real estate market? And then we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, the rental market right now, absolutely going insane in both Vancouver and the Fraser Valley, and what this means for real estate from a selling and buying perspective. Real quick, before we get started, if this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hassan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area, and I make this educational content to help you on your real estate journey. I also make content designed to help you make your move in and around Vancouver. So if that sounds interesting to you and you wanted to chat with me one-on-one, you can book me in the Calendly link below. But regardless, if you enjoy these weekly videos, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. All right, so the latest CPI data came out. The inflation percentage year over year compared to last year for May came in at 3.4%, which is much lower than many analysts were expecting, and likely much lower than the Bank of Canada was expecting as well. Now, the thing is, when we look at inflation numbers, we really have to look at what it is that is driving either an increase or a decrease. So you would think that this 3.4% number is extremely positive. This is the first time in over 2 years we've had a year over year increase this low in inflation. But when you look deeper into the numbers, you pull out the data, you see that the biggest reason we had this decline in inflation was last month we had a drop in oil prices. We had a drop at the pumps, essentially. So gas was cheap, and this was the largest driver of us being in that 3.4% range. Now, if we were to pull out that gas number itself, we would be back into the fours. So, not to be a pessimist, but I am a realist. When I look at that inflation number, it looks good, but I think we're going to have some challenges moving forward. I think really the time for us to be monitoring how we're going to look is August and September. I say this for a couple reasons. Keep in mind, with inflation data, we're comparing against last year, and I don't need to tell you guys, we were at peak levels of inflation last year, June, July, and then inflation started to come down. So when we're looking at future months now, when we're looking back at that year over year perspective, it's going to be much more difficult to have a lower number because we're comparing against lower numbers. So that's one of the things that I think is going to create a challenge when it comes to hitting the Bank of Canada's target of 2%. The other thing as well is mortgage interest itself. Now, the largest driver of increase in inflation, almost 30% of the increase in inflation is driven by mortgage interest. Now, the Bank of Canada, in this month, June, they raised the interest rates again. So people that are on variable rates, our mortgage interest has gone up. People that are taking fixed rates, so new mortgage originations for the most part, those have higher rates for sure. We're looking at rates today up at the sixes, where just a couple weeks back they were hovering in the lower fives. So mortgage interest has increased for fixed and variable rate holders. Also, when it comes to gasoline, because I was just talking about it, again, I don't need to tell you, if you've been to the pumps in the last week or so, you've noticed that increase in gas prices this month. So this will all be reflected in the data that gets released next month. So next month, I think, is one to watch. Are we going to actually make progress? You start to wonder now because, in July, we're probably going to see another Bank of Canada rate increase. Does the Bank of Canada, I don't think they'll do it, but does it start to make some sense for them to pull out that mortgage interest number? Because if you pull out the mortgage interest portion of inflation, we're in the twos. We're not quite at 2%, which is the target. I think we're about 2.5% if you're pulling out the mortgage interest. Of course, the bank can't really do that because, one of the biggest reasons that they have been increasing rates again is the frenzy or the pickup in the residential real estate market, which I don't think many people foresaw us to be hitting numbers that are basically at peak levels of last year. All right, so we're going to move over and we're going to talk about the incredibly frenzied rental real estate market right now, what's happening on that side. Earlier this year in January, I did a video where I said, look, rental investors, rental property owners are getting screwed because we're not able to raise rents a reasonable amount. And what this is going to mean for the tenant is they are going to get displaced. And sure enough, we're sitting right in the midst of it now, where we're seeing more and more tenanted properties hit the market. My clients themselves are reaching out to me. I'm getting at least 2 or 3 calls each week discussing, should we put our rental property on the market? A couple of them moving forward to list. So this is very prominent today, and a couple of examples of what's happening with that rental market. There was a one bedroom in the Brentwood area asking $23.95 a month. They got over 200 applicants. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is when I say the rental market is frenzied right now, that's not necessarily from a rental pricing perspective. In fact, I think a few months back, you could get a higher rental rate. I know for Brentwood, you could do $2,500 easy. So this one was asking about $2,400. 200 applicants. They ended up having an applicant secure it at $2,400 at the asking price. Now, they did have applicants that wanted to pay more, but because of their policy and their procedure, of course, they want to make sure that the applicant can pay. So they went through their background checks and they decided to choose a couple that essentially could afford the $2,400. And I wonder if we're going to see more of that. People, applying because of this desperation, applying for properties they can't even legitimately afford, and maybe they can do it in the short term, but you have 200 applicants on that side. I have a colleague of mine who's a property manager. She had 150 applicants in Port Moody. So this frenzy, and I think a lot of it is now moving eastward, it directly has to do with displacement happening at the tenant level in North Vancouver, Vancouver, and Burnaby. And a lot of these tenants now are shifting over to the Fraser Valley. And it's unfortunate because, they are paying the same rent that they are, for example, in downtown. They're getting displaced, and now they are forced to move out to Surrey, Langley, wherever it might be. I say it's unfortunate because for a lot of these people, they still work in Vancouver or North Vancouver, but this is shifting a lot of the rental demand into the valley. If you're looking to purchase a piece of property for investment for the long term that you plan to rent out, anywhere near SkyTrain is the way to go, especially on the Fraser Valley side, whether it's current SkyTrain or future SkyTrain. These are the areas that I'm telling my clients about to invest long term. Cities are getting smaller. You got to keep in mind, a Langley one bedroom can go for $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month for Langley. So this shift is going to continue to happen. I know that this sort of demand is happening as far east as Abbotsford as well. Hundreds of applicants, and it's unfortunate to see. Like, it's almost like winning the lottery to get one of these properties. And the people that don't get the properties, what ultimately are they going to do? I think the driving force behind this sort of rental demand, it has to do with this tenant displacement scenario. Also has to do with the amount of non-permanent residents that Canada is welcoming into the country. Over the last 4 quarters, Canada welcomed in 730,000 non-permanent residents. So this immediately affects the rental market specifically. In years prior, we were looking at a max. I don't think it ever touched 200,000. Over 700,000 in the last 4 quarters. So this is putting a strain on the rental market. Circling back to the tenant displacement and the rent control scenario, which I've done separate videos on, which I'll link in this video as well. But circling back to that, I know that conversations are happening now where landlords are calling tenants and saying, look, I'm likely going to sell your property. The numbers just don't make any sense. The rent is not doing it for me. I'm not able to cover my costs. I don't want to keep holding it. And after a couple days, the tenant and the landlord are discussing, is there a rate that would make sense? And then together they're mutually deciding to increase the rent. Because if you're a tenant, you don't necessarily want to go to your landlord preemptively and say, hey, I want to pay more. But if you find out that your landlord is looking at selling and you look at what the alternative is, having to pack all your stuff, move to a different location, 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers away from where you live now, and not even necessarily guaranteed to get a place because of 200 applicants, 150 applicants, you're going to want to increase your rental rate to stay. And it's unfortunate that this has to come down to the landlord and the tenant figuring this out because of our rent control policy here in BC. It's putting the strain on landlords, and there's some landlords that don't want to have this discussion. They're just going to list the property, sell it. An end user, someone who's going to live in the property, will move in, and another tenant is displaced. Now, before I close off this episode, really quickly, just want to let you guys know a video I did a couple weeks back. I mentioned that I would be updating on one of the most controversial development proposals in Vancouver over the last 5 to 7 years, and that was 105 Keefer. Just on Monday, it went to the vote from the development board and passed unanimously. So this was the project, 111 units in Chinatown with no social housing component. So there were people in the community on both sides of this. There were members of the community saying, without social housing, this does not serve the needs of the current residents that live in Chinatown. Then you had members of the business community saying, we cannot survive unless we revitalize Chinatown. We get it back to where it was. We start to bring in newcomers into the area that can spend money in our businesses so we can survive. And again, it was passed unanimously with a couple of minor changes, but nothing to do with the social housing component. And this was something that had been turned down, I believe it was 5 or 6 times in the past. A Supreme Court judge came in and said it was turned down unfairly, needs to be back on the table. It has been approved, so that development is going to move forward. All right, guys, so I hope you learned something in this video or you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button, because what that does is it takes the video and it sends it out to more people so they can learn from it as well. And if you enjoy these weekly videos on real estate, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next video. Lastly, if you're in the Vancouver area and you want to talk about your own real estate situation one-on-one with me, you can book me in the Calendly link below, or you can just send me a text, give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever you like. I would love to chat with you. But outside of that, thank you so much for watching this week's episode, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.